Hey there, this is Ari. Welcome back to the Energy Blueprint podcast. With me today is my friend, Dr. Tim Jackson, who is going to be talking about 7 ways to optimize your immune health. I'm very excited to have you deliver this presentation. Welcome, my friend.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited about it.
Yeah. So I'll hand it off to you and you can get into it.
Yeah. So as Ari mentioned, the title of my presentation is 7 ways to optimize your immune system for superhuman energy. And so a lot of times people don't associate the immune system with energy per se, but when you have immune imbalances, it can definitely affect energy levels, whether it's mentally, physically, etc. So I just wanted to touch on a few basic points of what the immune system does. We know that it helps us fight off or ward off invading pathogens that we may be exposed to. But it also plays a pretty essential role in controlling inflammation. And there's an axis called the neuroendocrine immune axis. And so your nervous system, your hormonal system, and your immune system are very much intertwined. And when you have imbalances in the immune system, it can have downstream effects on the other 2. So tip number 1, avoid and detoxify, if you already have them, mold/mycotoxins. So mycotoxins are just the compounds that different species of mold will produce. And mold is a true pandemic, and it has been for some time now. There's many species of mold, several of which you can't see or smell. Stachybotrys, which is black mold, obviously you can see that one. But there can be mold behind your walls, in the kitchen counters or places that you don't, inspect readily. And it can be taking a toll on your overall health, but particularly your immune system. So if you look at the common denominator amongst all the mycotoxins, they're immunosuppressive. So some will lower natural killer cells, some might lower T cells. It just depends. But there are several that are also carcinogenic. So in terms of the mold and testing for it, there are several tests that we have that are urine laboratory tests that basically give us a picture of your overall body burden of mold and mycotoxins. And so with that being said, if you want to do one of these tests, you most definitely can. But more generally, you want to always use a high quality air filter in your home and office. And the deal is that mycotoxins are extremely small. So there are certain brands of air filters that are promoted by the American Academy of Environmental Medicine and that mold-trained physicians use. A few of those are Air Oasis, IQ Air, Austin Air, and they will filter out other things, not just mold and mycotoxins, but the mold and mycotoxins is extremely important because indoor air on average is between 5 and 10 times more polluted than outdoor air. And if you're spending more time indoors these days, then the air filter becomes even more important. Another tip is to keep the humidity levels in your home 50% or below. And that comes from Dr. Richie Shoemaker. That's what he recommends. And I have people buy digital humidity meters. And it's easier to do than you think. So I know, Ari, you live by the ocean, that people think that if you live in the desert, you automatically will never have mold. And if you live by the water, then you're going to automatically have mold. But actually, the reverse can be true as long as you do the right things. And so,
people who live in desert areas, I know, I have some family that lives in Phoenix, for example, and they're indoors like 99% of the time.
Right.
So with air conditioning on. So yeah,
right.
And be counterintuitive in that way. That's also same is true with sun exposure, right? A lot of people who
live in very sunny climates, especially desert climates, actually don't get enough sun because they're always avoiding the heat and the hot sun.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. If one of your family members, has any symptoms, and those symptoms, if the more systems that are involved and the more bizarre it seems, the more likely you are to be affected by mold. And let's say there's 4 members of the family: mom, dad, Johnny, and Susie. Well, Johnny may have trouble sleeping and pain in his joints. Mom may have severe brain fog. Dad may have what he thinks is a chronic cold or viral infection. And then some people may not be affected at all. And so a lot of times I'll see situations where one spouse is affected, the other's not. And so the one who's not thinks that the person who's affected is, crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't find what you don't look for. So that's where, we talked about testing your body. We can also test your house. And so there are various types of mold testing companies that will come to your home. And the good, legitimate companies will look behind the walls with cameras, very specific cameras that look for areas of increased condensation. And that way they can isolate the problem versus tearing down something that doesn't need to be torn down. You can also,
Do you think, I've heard kind of mixed stories of how useful the home testing is. Do you think that the urine mycotoxin test is maybe a more accurate screening tool to really determine if you actually have exposure or not?
So when I get someone's urine mycotoxin test back and it's elevated, I can't say for certain that, 80% came from your home, 10% from your office. It may, in fact, not be anything current. It could have been at your high school or your college. And so,
how can that be? The mycotoxins stay in your system for years?
Yeah, they can.
I mean, what are they're just circulating in your body for years without being cleared, or are you saying that like mold is growing in the body as a result of a past exposure?
Both of those can actually happen. But what I will say is that, depending on your HLA genotype, it affects your ability to detoxify mold to varying degrees. So I'm someone that, has a great degree of difficulty detoxifying mold. So, I'm a little bit extra cautious. But other people, once you have detoxified the mold and you've kind of retrained those limbic loops, those neural circuit pathways, where once you have a stressor present, it kind of activates, a self-perpetuating cascade. Once you calm that down, then you'll be better off and you won't react so strongly. Because you're never going to get away from every species of mold. But the deal is that mold behaves very differently indoors than it does outdoors. And so it's just like in the GI tract, when you have just 1 or 2 species in massive quantities and they grow without any checks and balances versus having a diversity of bugs that keep each other in check.
Got it. So as far as detoxifying these mycotoxins, I mean, you said that they can stay in your system for years. If apparently the body must not be very good at clearing them. So is it possible to use any substances that can help the body clear them?
Yeah. So typically, when Dr. Shoemaker originally came out with Mold Warriors, the trend was to use cholestyramine, a cholesterol lowering drug. The problem with that was that it bound up all your vitamins and minerals, and it had aspartame, and it made you constipated. So now, luckily, we found several nutraceutical supplements that help bind and escort out through the stool the mycotoxins. And some examples of those, one that I use frequently, is called Takasumi Supreme. And it's an extract from the bamboo tree that looks very similar to activated charcoal, but it's a little bit stronger. There's also a product called bioactive carbon, and that tends to be good at not only binding mycotoxins, but things like histamine and aldehydes as well. And so that is one way to help support the body. Another way is to improve lymphatic circulation, since that's where your immune cells are going to dump the garbage. And also, one thing that mycotoxins do that I know will really resonate with you is they block the NRF2 pathway when they go inside the cell. And so for most of my patients with mold toxicity, I have them use liposomal DIM. And we've all heard of DIM for estrogen metabolism or estrogen dominance, but it also lifts that block on NRF2. And that will allow for increased antioxidant production, detoxification, enzyme production, etc.
And so people who didn't catch that, it's DIM. It stands for diindomethane. So that's what he's referring to as a liposomal formulation of DIM or diindomethane.
So if you've had any water damage to your house, you want to remediate it immediately. Time is of the essence when you have water damage. And one thing that's a little bit counterintuitive for people is they think that if they live in the Northeast or a colder climate, that, there's no possibility that they could have mold. But actually there's an increased probability because you have increased precipitation, so rain, snow, etc., but you don't have as much sunlight to help with evaporation. So that's one thing to take into account. The other thing is a lot of people say, oh, my house is only 2 years old, it can't have mold. But when houses are built to be energy efficient, that energy efficiency comes at a cost. And so, if we go outside, there's a lot of different species of mold, but they're balancing each other out. But if we have one or two that become very dominant in the home or office place, then that's when they become a real nuisance to your health. And then this is just basic home maintenance, but it's extremely important for mold prevention, and that's having your ductwork cleaned. If you're really sensitive to mold, twice a year, but definitely once a year for sure. There's also an MD who created a line of products to help with things like washing your clothes, washing your dishes, cleaning your nasal passages. And that line of products is called Microbalance Health Products. And I don't have any association with them. It's just a brand that I've come to respect and admire. So tip number 2 is optimize your body temperature. So I know you talk a ton about, the use of sauna, heat, cold showers, etc., for balancing the autonomic nervous system, improving vagal tone, and resiliency. But there's 2 ways, when we talk about proteins, there's 2 ways to change the function: change the temperature or change the pH. And so in this case, when we're changing the temperature, meaning, your body temperature is, let's say, at 2 p.m., it's 98.0 degrees Fahrenheit, then that's going to cause a decrease in all of your biochemical reactions in the body. So your detoxification reactions, your immune function, your peristalsis and digestion. So all of that's going to be impacted. And so when we're going to talk about saunas later, but, saunas definitely help with detoxification, but they also increase your core body temperature. And when you do that, you are arming the body with more weapons to fight off various pathogens. And so that, can be very helpful in addition to upregulating things like heat shock proteins, etc. in terms of your body temperature, it's going to typically be lower in the morning and higher in the early to mid-afternoon. I recommend taking it, 2 to 3 times in the afternoon, and then, keeping a log of that. And so there are many things that can affect your body temperature. And some of those are things like poor thyroid function, SIBO that is hydrogen dominant. So just real quick, hydrogen sulfide gas puts your body in a state of torpor or hibernation. So that's one that a lot of people don't think about, but it can affect it. And then poor autonomic nervous system regulation. So your autonomic nervous system is your sympathetic, your parasympathetic, which Ari talks about a lot, and your parasympathetic, that's where all your healing takes place. So things you can do to optimize your body temperature, some action steps. When you have your thyroid tested, your free T3, which is your active bioavailable thyroid hormone, I like to see it at 3.5 nanograms per deciliter or higher. And every cell in your body has a receptor for thyroid. So it's extremely important for longevity, brain health, and pretty much everything. So when the thyroid goes offline, you can have a set of cascading events that take place. Other things that you need to do anyways, but will also help the thyroid, optimizing your levels of zinc, selenium, and iodine. So things like selenium, you can get from Brazil nuts. Zinc being the second most common mineral deficiency, most people need to supplement with zinc, I find. And iodine, same thing. And iodine has an additional benefit of being antimicrobial. So a few other points about optimizing your body temperature. Testosterone plays a role in body temperature. So I believe it's the first 2 steps in the Krebs cycle that it impacts. But if your testosterone is low or less than optimal, then that can negatively impact your body temperature. And the last thing is making sure you optimize your mitochondria.
Oh, there's a huge topic.
Yeah, and I know this course called the Energy Blueprint that goes into great detail. I don't know if you've heard of it or not, but it goes into great detail on how to optimize the mitochondria versus, tinkering with the adrenals, which, there's a rule, we won't go off topic, but the mitochondria, there's so many different ways to optimize them. And Ari talks about that in greater detail than I ever could in the Energy Blueprint.
Bonus points for you for the shout out. And nice. I get someone who I'm interviewing, doing a shameless plug for my program. I dig it.
There's no shame in my game.
Nice.
So some other action steps that I know you talk about, but people don't typically think about is optimizing your circadian rhythm. And, that affects, I think, over 300 different genes being expressed. It affects your NAD levels, which is a molecule in the mitochondria that's helpful for energy. And so also keeping psychological and mental, emotional stress low. Because, and I know you interviewed someone on this topic, but chronic, even low-level psychological stress activates the cell danger response. Mm-hmm. And so, that's not something you wanted to really do.
Yeah, measurable effects on mitochondrial function within minutes of psychological stress. So, yep. Yeah, it's a link. The mind mitochondria link is a link that most people are not very aware of. So I like that you're mentioning that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I learned it from the Energy Blueprint.
Nice.
So tip number 3. So tip number 1 was avoid and detoxify mold and mycotoxins. Tip number 2 is optimize your body temperature. Tip number 3 is optimize your microbiome. So your microbiome, you've probably heard that term by now. Most people think of the gut or large intestines when they hear it, but you also have a microbiome in your mouth, on your skin, in your respiratory tract, in your urinary tract. And so when you have imbalances in your microbiome, meaning not enough of the good bugs, too many of the bad bugs, then that's going to negatively affect nutrient absorption and assimilation. And it can also negatively affect thyroid function. So for example, 20% of your T4, which is inactive thyroid hormone, gets converted to T3, active thyroid hormone, in the gut. So when we have a gut issue affecting body temperature and hormonal health, 70 to 80% of your immune system is located in your large intestines. And so that's where, it becomes really important when we talk about mothers giving birth, for breastfeeding, and that contact, that skin-to-skin contact and development of the palate, and also for getting the immunoglobulins from mother's milk. And so a couple recommendations for optimizing the microbiome. You can certainly have a gut test or stool test done. Some are more accurate than others. None are perfect by any means, but some pathogens will require a little more specific antimicrobials than others. And so that's the weeding part. So we talk about weeding and seeding. So the weeding part is killing off the bad bugs with as little collateral damage as possible to the good bugs, and also replenishing or seeding the good bacteria. And so the probiotics that I like are delactate free and histamine free. Grace Liu has a good one, Bifido Maximus, that I like. And that
I actually just interviewed her and picked up some of the Bifido Maximus, and she sent
nice.
some other goodies I just ordered yesterday. So
nice.
Mentioned she sent me some bonus gifts along with my package of Bifido Maximus.
Sweet. Yeah. She knows her stuff when it comes to the gut.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, when we talk about healing the gut lining, because if you're taking probiotics, they won't have much of an effect if the gut lining is really inflamed. So healing the gut lining will also result in systemic inflammation. So to calm that down, we can use things like zinc carnosine, aloe, glutamine, marshmallow root. There's really an endless number of colostrum of products and nutraceuticals that we can use to heal the gut. And, the first step to developing an autoimmune issue is a leaky gut or intestinal hyperpermeability. So I know if you go to PubMed and you type in leaky gut, you get maybe 2 results. If you type in intestinal hyperpermeability, hundreds. So just an FYI. A couple things that lead to gut dysfunction or microbiome dysfunction: glyphosate from Roundup is a huge problem. And so even if you're eating GMO free, you've likely been exposed to glyphosate, and you could do a test for it. There's a specific test for it, but I would just tell most people to assume they have it and work on just general sustainable detoxification strategies. The other thing...
Are you aware of any specific compound that helps detoxify glyphosate?
I know of a compound that prevents the uptake of it. I don't know of many compounds that are specific to detoxifying glyphosate.
Got it. Is that fulvic acid?
That is a Restore or Ion Biome now.
It's a variant of humic acid.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, correct. Vagal tone, which we talked about before, or balancing your autonomic nervous system, that's very important when it comes to gut health. So it doesn't matter if you're taking probiotics, aloe, or any of that. If you're chronically stressed and in a state of sympathetic dominance, fight or flight, then that's going to disrupt your microbiome and lead to leaky gut. And so there's exercises, there's lists of them Joe Cohen, Self-Hacked, has a list of 27 different exercises you can do for vagal tone. But chewing gum, singing, gargling, things like that will help stimulate the vagus nerve. And we talked about using different antimicrobials to help weed out the bad bugs. So typically those are things like oil of oregano, biocidin you may have heard of, biocidin, blaucidin, Interphase Plus, which is a biofilm buster. So bacteria in the mouth and in the gut produce biofilm, and systemically. Biofilm is just a protective coating. But when you take the biofilm buster and break it open, that allows the antimicrobials to become much more effective. So that's tip number 3, optimize your microbiome. Tip number 4, and this is a timely one, address stealth pathogens. So what is a stealth pathogen? Why is it called stealth? So it's not, if you don't know what to look for, then you really, you might tell the person, hey, you're depressed, here's some Prozac or something, or you're stressed out, take a week off from work or something. But there are many pathogens out there like mycoplasma, HHV6, etc., that there are many types of them, and they may not be shown as active on a test because your immune cells may be exhausted just from trying to keep them suppressed. So that's one reason. Another thing to point out is both Dr. Jacob Teitelbaum, who wrote From Fatigue to Fantastic, and Dr. Alex Vasquez, who has a course on the mitochondria and inflammation as well, say that if the IgG to a certain pathogen, if it's around 4 times the normal top end of the range, you need to suspect that that is currently active. And, what I've seen in my patients and clients is that, when we address the pathogens, of course it takes time, but you start to see improvements. I have one client, just by addressing his viral load, his deep sleep went from 20% to 40%. And I would have never expected that, but it was a surprise to me. So what are some other stealth pathogens? We mentioned mycoplasma, but it can be Lyme, Bartonella, Babesia, yeast, or Candida, and then other viruses like Epstein-Barr, HHV6, parvovirus, etc.
I also want to mention, just to link this with one of the other presentations from one of the other speakers, Dr. Evan Hirsch specifically spoke about the stealth pathogens issue and kind of went through a list of specific symptoms that are, kind of associated with each particular virus of the most common stealth infection. So really nice to pair that talk, which goes in depth on this specific point that Dr. Jackson is getting into now. So just wanted to mention for everybody listening, good to pair that episode with this one.
Yeah, and I know Dr. Hirsch and we've talked back and forth about neurotropic viruses, which simply means a virus that likes to live in the nervous system tissue. And so that's another reason why it might not show up as positive on the blood. But I had a patient, just a quick anecdote, that came to me a few years ago. He had gone to the Amen clinics and, they gave him some supplements for neurotransmitters and things like that. And his psychiatrist said, well, there's no way that a virus is leading to your depression. And so we did his viral panel, and he had, I think, 4 pathogens that were active.
Wow.
And so, it was interfering with his sleep, his cognition, a number of different things. And so, I know now with the current pandemic, people are using the phrase cytokine storm more and more often. And so when we feel the effects of a pathogen, it's typically due to the immune system releasing these pro-inflammatory molecules. Now, there are also anti-inflammatory cytokines, but the ones that are causing the symptoms are the pro-inflammatory cytokines. So different labs can do lab tests, LabCorp. There's a lab called Medical Diagnostics Laboratory, as well as Cyrex labs can test for these pathogens. We talked about biofilm busters for the gut. There's also biofilm busters for treating systemic infections. And so those are systemic enzymes, a little bit different than digestive enzymes. So some examples are products like lumbrokinase, serrapeptase, WAB enzyme, a product out of Germany, and they're typically taken on an empty stomach and then followed up 30 minutes later with an antimicrobial.
Interesting side note, something I just learned that, I've known about systemic enzymes for 2 decades, but I just learned a unique aspect of them that I didn't know about, specifically related to immune health, even beyond the one that you're mentioning here, which is very important, but less for treating an active infection and more for maintaining good immune health. Some of the enzymes like serrapeptase in particular has been tested on maintaining good mucus function of the mucous membranes. And so it helps basically to clear mucus and keep fresh mucus generating to allow those mucous membranes to clear viruses and pathogens better. And I started reading up on some research after I heard that, and I was very impressed with what's out there. And just a cool side note of something I just learned 2 weeks ago.
That is very cool. And in addition, the last thing I'll mention is that they're very good at dissolving or breaking up what's called circulating immune complexes. So you have a pathogen, and then you have the antibody that comes, or several antibodies that come and attach or surround it. And those can clog up the lymphatic system. They can create systemic inflammation. So that's one way that systemic enzymes can also benefit you.
Mm-hmm.
The last thing I'll say about addressing stealth pathogens is you want to optimize your methylation cycle. So methylation cycle involves all the B vitamins plus magnesium and zinc. Typically, most people think of B12, methylfolate, and B6, and those are important, but the rest of the B vitamins are also important. And the reason this plays a role is because it impacts your CD4 to CD8 natural killer cell or T helper cell to T suppressor cell ratio. And those are important in terms of optimizing immune function.
To your point of other B vitamins being important, as you said, most of the focus on, for example, methylation, for example, the MTHFR gene, poor variants of it that are associated with low methylation. You always see B12, B6 emphasized. But there was a new study that just came out in the last 6 months, I believe, on specifically riboflavin, showing that riboflavin alone was able to normalize methylation status in people with these non-optimal variants of MTHFR. So, absolutely.
I saw that, what you're referring to, the paper. I've read the abstract. I haven't read the whole paper yet, but yeah, B2 is very important. It also helps thyroid health and energy production. So tip number 5, modify the stress response. So eradicate, unnecessary stress, but there's this guy named Ari Witt that talks about hormetic stressors. And so basically, that's kind of priming the pump, preparing your system. So you press on the gas pedal and you back off. But unnecessary stress, that, they stack on top of each other. So if you get stuck in traffic, you have a few chronic infections, heavy metals, you don't sleep well, those are all stressors to your body. And so the second thing you can do is restructure how you perceive certain stressors or the value that you assign to those. So, we're constantly bombarded by stimuli and we label it salient or not salient, but cognitive restructuring is basically taking a picture off the wall, taking the frame off and putting a new frame on it. And so, that might seem trivial, but it can have a huge impact on your physiology. And, if the brain doesn't perceive it as a stressor, then the negative physiological reactions won't occur. Awesome. Another thing, and I know people have talked about this, but learn to meditate. Again, you don't have to sit in the corner with your legs crossed saying, to meditate. It might just be doing nothing for 5 minutes, just turning off all electronics. You'd be surprised at how the little things add up. And another thing is in your relationships with people, make sure that you're being respected as well as respectful of other people, and that your voice is being heard. Because, there's a good book called Feelings Buried Alive Never Die. And so if you're constantly suppressing stuff and not advocating for yourself, that builds up over time. And a psychologist friend of mine told me she's not worried about people who have a death in the family or lose their job, because normally their support system surrounds them. She's more concerned about the people who have these chronic low-level stressors day in and day out. And so nutrients that you can use to help modify the stress response: magnesium, L-theanine, GABA. Magnesium you need for a zillion different reasons. So it's not like you're taking an extra supplement. And so I always tell people to start with that one because you need it for blood pressure and ATP production, et cetera. And then optimizing your circadian rhythm. I know if my circadian rhythm gets off by 45 minutes or an hour, that my stress response is very much heightened the next few days.
I'm with you.
And so, sleep, obviously, when you don't sleep, if your sleep quality is poor, I can move this pen and, someone might get upset or yell at me, and, everything is magnified. So again, deep breathing, circadian rhythm, and the vagus nerve exercises. So tip 6 is mild to moderate exercise, which I know you talk about a lot. Excessive exercise, like marathon runners, they've been shown to be immunocompromised, especially right after their race. But mild to moderate exercise, start where you are and gradually build. But mild to moderate exercise will improve resilience and stress tolerance. And for me, I know it improves sleep. And so I know Ari talks about improving your sleep quality and your circadian rhythm. That goes hand in hand. And in terms of mild to moderate exercise, it doesn't have to be a very rigid exercise plan that you go to the gym and you have to wait 45 seconds before you do this and lift this many pounds. It can literally be going to the playground with your kid, playing on the monkey bars from the jungle gym. And that play, you may not realize it at the time because you're just interacting with your kid, but it's beneficial for your nervous system and releases a ton of beneficial compounds. So another way to increase exercise physical activity is called NEPA, or non-exercise physical activity. And all that means is if you park right by the grocery store, start parking at the end of the aisle. Things like that. Instead of driving a mile down the road or a half mile down the road, walk.
Back in our pre-coronavirus days when we used to go to the grocery store.
Right. Yeah, I took my hazmat suit off for this presentation. So resistance training and aerobic training can be combined in the form of circuit training. Like I said earlier, stress is cumulative. So when the other areas of your life are very stressful, you don't want to go to the gym and make yourself throw up. That's counterproductive. You should feel better after a workout, not like you're bedridden. That's not doing anyone any good. One way that you can track, how hard you should train or if you should train that day is heart rate variability, which I believe you go into a lot of detail about, right?
Yeah, I was going to interject that, I was for many years kind of addicted to exercise. I was in a chronic state of over-exercising, to intense hour-long sessions every day, 7 days a week. And
Oh, wow.
With taking a lot of stuff to very high intensity, to failure, to exhaustion, and tracking heart rate variability, as well as just getting a little older and wiser and realizing that I was running down my immune system in particular, and actually experiencing lower energy levels as a result of chronically overexercising. Having that heart rate variability as a biofeedback tool to have this objective marker to say, maybe rest today, or do a lighter workout today, back off a little bit. That was critical for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I wasn't that hardcore, 2 sessions a day, 7 days a week, but I did lift, hard 6 to 7 days a week. And, you can't out exercise stressors in other aspects of your life that you're not addressing.
Yeah.
That's something I learned the hard way.
Very true. And yeah, I have a different exercise tolerance now, in my mid 30s, running a business that is extremely demanding and having 2 kids, than I was in my mid 20s when I was a single guy and had really nothing to do other than do personal training part-time and work out,
Right. So tip number 7, I know you're going to love this one. Get hot with a sauna. So we talked about having a low body temperature earlier and how we need to optimize that. Well, the benefits of a sauna, we could literally do 4 days worth of presentations on, but heating, again, the principle is heating the body up, increasing your core body temperature. Now, if it's a far infrared, like you talk about in the energy blueprint, those waves are going to penetrate into the body and improve circulation, help with detoxification. And it's really, at the higher temperatures that you see the most benefit. There's also full spectrum saunas where you have far infrared, but you also have mid and near infrared. And, if you have access to one of those, that's great. But if not, a far infrared sauna definitely will do the trick. And that's what they used in the September 11th or 9/11 rescue workers, the firefighters, first responders, et cetera, to help them detoxify. And when we talk about the higher temperatures, 150 to 170 degrees. And when it comes to sauna use, frequency is more important than duration. So if you could only do 15 to 20 minutes, say 5 days a week, that's better than doing an hour and a half twice a week. So how does the sauna benefit you? Specifically, how does the far infrared sauna benefit you? Well, one is it's going to increase levels of certain types of white blood cells. And that's just a byproduct of increasing your core temperature. Okay. And you're also getting better nutrient delivery. You get an upregulation of heat shock proteins, which I know you talk about a lot, which Dr. Rhonda Patrick, or Dr. Rhonda Patrick, she also talks about that. And one thing that, is just icing on the cake for me is the far infrared sauna puts you in more of a parasympathetic tone. And then we just mentioned exercise. It's also a passive cardiovascular mimetic. So, you see on the movies, these kind of overweight or obese guys in Italy or Rome or wherever. And, you're wondering, how are they alive? But, you're working on improving your fitness, even though you're not on an elliptical or lifting heavy weights.
Just to that point, there's some research out of Finland. I'm sure you've seen it. The researcher's name is something Finnish. It's like Jaro Laukatinen, something
Yeah.
like that. But he's published a number of really amazing studies, epidemiological studies looking at sauna use in relationship to various diseases, cardiovascular disease, neurodegenerative diseases, and even all-cause mortalities, just showing massive reductions in all of those, cardiovascular disease in particular, dramatic reduction. So that, there's a sizable body of research, to your point, basically showing that this cardiovascular mimetic, it's sort of mimicking the effects of exercise, and it absolutely is translating into reduced risk of cardiovascular disease.
Yeah, absolutely. The only thing I tell people to be cognizant of is when you're going to the really high temperatures, you probably want to supplement with an electrolyte supplement.
I actually just got out of the sauna right before this, so I'm
Oh, really?
sipping water, rehydrating. Yeah.
Yeah. So, the sauna, if I could go back to when I got into functional medicine and make one investment, it would be a full spectrum sauna.
Yeah.
Because the benefits just go on and on and on. And, supplements are great, but you have to buy a new bottle every month. But once you make that investment, it's there forever, pretty much.
Yeah. Dr. Tim, this has been awesome. Thank you for going into such great immune tips beyond, the typical sort of, hey, here's some immune boosting herbs and supplements. I think this is some really novel, atypical stuff when it comes to, how people think about boosting their immune function in this very important time to boost their immune function. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for the Energy Blueprint.
Yeah. So if somebody's interested in following you or working with you, where's the best place to reach out to you?
Yeah, healyourbody.org. So that's healyourbody.org. They can contact me through the form there, and I will get the email.
And you work with people one-on-one, correct?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And basically a functional medicine practice.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Dr. Tim, thank you so much, my friend. Great connecting with you as always, and I look forward to the next time very much.
Yes, me too.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
To everyone listening, hope you enjoyed this episode. I'm sure you did, and I will see you in the next one. Hey there, this is Ari again. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, if you found it valuable, please share it with your friends, share it with your family, help me get the word out there. Also, if you're on YouTube, make sure to hit the subscribe button and hit that little bell to get notifications every time we release a new video or new episode of the podcast. And if you're listening to this, make sure to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or on your favorite podcast app. Thanks so much for supporting my work at the Energy Blueprint. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I will see you in the next